rising point last meeting, which took place Monday 24th and Tuesday, January 25th, the CBN Monetary Policy Committee unanimously left the monetary policy rate unchanged at 11.5%, while keeping all other monetary parameters constant. A highlight of the committee's decision, that is the MPR, retained at 11.50%, the asymmetric corridor of 100 to 700 basis points around the MPR, which was retained as well. The cash reserve ratio was also retained at 27.5%, while liquidity ratio was kept at 30%. Recall the MPC observed that inflation in most developed and emerging economies remain high, driven by the persistent exchange rate fluctuations and supply bottlenecks. However, going by the latest inflationary figure, which rose from 15.6% in January to 15.7% in February 2022, and also the core inflation rising to 14.0%, bearing in mind that the uptick in the inflation figures for the month of February 2022 was due to the ripple effect of fuel scarcity on cost of transportation and food prices, among others. So expectant that a disruption in the MPR, which has remained unchanged for a while, could change. So the question is, what then is likely to change this time, given the latest development in the global economy? So let's get talking now. Mr. Wagala Kwaga is a policy researcher and senior analyst at the Budget Foundation, Lagos. With a background in law, Mr. Kwaga has skill and experience in policy analysis, political economy analysis, and public financial management. So he joins us via the telephone now. Thank you for your time, Mr. Kwaga, for your time on the program.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Let's look at these. First, I want to ask you what your expectations are concerning the fact that the CBN Monetary Policy Committee will be meeting this week, and what you think is likely to change the direction for around their conversation this time.
So, we all are aware of the various tools that the CBN uses as part of monetary policy. Anytime I have the opportunity to speak on public platforms like this, I like to remind listeners that there are two instruments of government economic policy: monetary policy from the CBN and fiscal policy from the Ministry of Finance. The ultimate aim of the central bank's policies is to maintain price stability, is to create the situations that would lead to, higher productivity and economic growth, and to promote maximum employment. The CBN does this by dictating how much it costs to borrow money, by dictating how much banks need to have before they lend, by dictating interest rates in general, because the CBN is the bank to the federal government and basically guides the commercial banks within the economy. So our expectations, or my expectations rather, is that the policy rates would likely remain. If you are aware, we just technically came out of a recession. So it's possible that the intention of the central bank will be to maintain the level of liquidity. Looking at liquidity cannot be done in isolation. You also must consider inflation rate, the unemployment rate, the gross domestic product, gross national income levels. So you are looking at this thing holistically. With a likely increase in inflation, it would be unwise for the CBN to increase the monetary policy rates, thereby increasing the amount of the money supply in the economy. That goes against the orthodox economic view that in situations of growing inflation, government policy should adopt a contractionary stance and vice versa. So when the economy is contracting, the government would be spending more or creating broad opportunities for liquidity. But I think that one area that the central bank needs to look at is the nature of macroprudential management. Just how on top of their game has the CBN been in monitoring the use and the uptake of loans by Nigerians through commercial banks. We're all aware that the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, even the CBN in recent years have been giving a huge amount of loans to Nigerians. Be that as it may, it's interesting to find out just how successful this is what we expect to hear. This is what we expect to know.
Okay.
But looking at the likely stance, I suspect that most of their rates would remain the same.
I want us to, let me come in quickly. I want us to touch on a bit of the non-performing loans that you talk about. How well is it performing really? Because if you look at it, yes, we know that the latest figure from the CBN shows that the level of non-performing loans in Nigeria has dropped to 4%. But how significant is this figure?
I mean, the significance of these figures have to be looked at in the context of the broader economy. We don't really have information. We don't have first-hand information from the central bank on just how well these loans have performed or whether they have performed at all. This also speaks to broader systemic problems of transparency. Just how transparent has the central bank and banks under its supervision been in the uptake of their loans? These are things that we need to know, because it's from this information that research will be carried out to determine whether or not these non-performing loans have a very broad, entrenched negative effect on the economy. There are several levels, in which one can look at this thing. For instance, Nairametrics has done some pretty fantastic work on the operation of CBN monetary policy, and looking at some of their research, they've found out that there's no direct correlation between money supply and output growth. So are we really focusing on the right things as regards economic growth? It appears that what really influences economic growth is crude oil prices, and that is another kettle of fish as regards Nigeria's governance, as regards Nigeria's revenue targets, as regards the management of Nigeria's economy.
Okay, let's talk about the inflation now. You talked about the inflation earlier. The committee is expected to look closely at the inflation rate, which has been trending around, because if you look at the inflation rate for January, which was about 15.6%, and February rose to 15.7% in the month of February. So how is this likely to shape or influence the MPC decisions? You talk about how to also manage the rising inflation.
Yes. So central banks, at least by and large around the world, tend to adopt certain positions as regards inflation. In the use of their policy, there's a tool called inflation rate targeting. This is when the central bank, in its drive to achieve price stability, tries to attack inflation and tries to at least ameliorate the experience of citizens within a particular country. Now, how it goes about doing this, it has several options. It can use its open market operations, sell treasury bills, in the capital market, give out bonds. So my question then becomes, this has been a notable policy of the CBN. How successful have these bond sales been on the overall growth of the economy? How successful has the reduction in an interest rate, making it more expensive for people to borrow in banks, been positive to the growth of the economy? How has it put more money into the hands of entrepreneurs? Because the end goal is the growth of the economy. The engine rooms of an economy is its industry, its entrepreneurs, its medium, small, and micro enterprises. These make up 95% of private sector employment. So if at the end of the day, the money in the hands of these individual firms is not more, does not have more purchasing power than it used to, then no matter what the monetary policy rates are, no matter what the asymmetric corridors and the liquidity ratios are, no matter what the macroprudential guidelines are, if the money in the hands of businesses at the end of the day cannot buy more today than it could yesterday, then you would not have the optimal economic growth that you seek.
But okay, so let's look at you talk about the issue of the asymmetric corridor. But then again, if you look at what the CBN is doing as regards the macroeconomic policies, which of course it has disclosed that it has improved access to finance and credit for households. Look at the small and medium-sized enterprise in 2022. So given these interventions in manufacturing and agri, for instance, and other sectors, so what do you think the CBN is not getting right in these areas? Because it would seem that yet we're seeing the CBN intervention, but yet there seems to be little growth.
Yes. So again, this goes back to the issue of monitoring and evaluation and transparency. How well does the CBN work with the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning? How well merged are their plans? What is the level of coordination between these two focal instruments of the Nigerian economic policy stance? When there is no coordination between long-term planning, which, I mean, medium to long-term planning, short-term planning, which the Ministry of Budget and Planning is responsible for, and the pushing in or, a contraction of spending by the federal government through its projects, which is the purview of the Ministry of Finance, and the maintenance of price stability by the central bank. If all of these, entities are not working together, if they are not sharing information, if there is no, publicity of this information for, the private sector, for citizens groups to monitor, to measure, to research on, and to get, their independent findings. If there are no forums for citizens to respond to government and to ask them why they are carrying out these decisions, which is accountability, if these elements are not part of the Nigerian, not part of the Nigerian governance system, then it's, akin to the CBN throwing money at a problem. You can throw so much, and you cannot expect to
Mr. Yeah, Mr. Okay, Mr. Kwaga, let's wrap up with this one quickly. One key topic of conversation is the instability of the Naira as the greenback continues to gain upper hand. This is due to the volatility in the forex market. According to data analyzed by the IMF recently, the Nigerian currency has depreciated by about 10.6% since more than about 2 decades now. Well, so how do you think at this point, in this meeting, particularly this particular MPC meeting, what do you think the CBN should address? How do you think the CBN should address this forest problem?
I mean, for one, Nigeria needs to sell more oil. I mean, that's the answer right there. How the CBN can make that situation possible, is what I think they need to think about in terms of their coordination and collaboration with other agencies and entities of the government. Because, I mean, it's common knowledge that Nigeria's largest revenue earner is oil. And despite the rise of oil prices, Nigeria will likely not be able to reap those benefits because production has been in decline. So, I know that we have extremely intelligent people working in our government agencies, but I do not get a sense that there is that key collaboration and coordination between the agencies of the government, because they often tend to see themselves working in isolation, and I guess, maybe unknown to them, government should be cohesive. Every single part of the government exists for a particular function, and these functions have very real consequences on the lives of Nigerians. So yes, there would likely be even more inflation as Nigeria is unable to sell more. Your currency appreciates and does well when inflation is reduced and you are exporting far more than you are importing, earning more in terms of your external reserves and for your country in general. So if the CBN does not, proactively look at measures to ensure that the strongest Naira is in the hands of the most businesses, then we will just find ourselves in a worse position.
I think we need to leave it there. Thank you so much.